Hello, today I'll be talking you through the resource I designed for my Year 10 mixed attainment class in an all-boys school. The resource I have designed focuses on the key concept of logical thinking within essay planning. My rationale for picking this concept is based on some AQA examiner reports that outline successful students often plan. Furthermore, I wanted to encourage my students to plan a cohesive response in relation to a Macbeth essay-style question. This formed part 3 of a sequence of lessons. Prior to the use of my resource, there were 2 lessons that prepared the students for essay writing. With this being lesson 3 out of 4 in the sequence of lessons that built up to the exam question, how does Shakespeare present the change in Macbeth and Lady Macbeth's characters in Act 5, I decided to focus on the key skill of planning. When deciding to adapt the planning resource, I opted to align my own teaching style with a social constructivist approach in the classroom. This means that I emphasised a collaborative approach between myself as teacher and the students in the classroom to successfully create an essay plan. This decision appealed to me as it would enhance the cohort's confidence when approaching an essay-style question. Furthermore, working collaboratively allowed me to scaffold an essay plan with the students before gradually reducing the support to build their independence. Furthermore, I was drawn to focusing on the key concept of planning due to a study by Tasmin Fall. In the 2007 study, Fall identified the misconception that A-level students can write well. Throughout her study, she recognised that the only area that appeared to have attracted much comment is essay planning. She goes on to reference Brown and Gifford, 1989, who stressed the need for effective planning. From my own observations throughout my first school placement, I agree that there needs to be great emphasis on effective planning techniques. Moreover, following conversations with my teacher mentor, we established that the current Year 10 group were in Year 5 of primary education throughout the global pandemic. Although an outdated study, I believe its findings are relevant to the current post-pandemic school climate. For my mixed attainment Year 10 class, a common weakness is their standard of prose when crafting a logical essay. I have observed the quality of their reading and writing and concluding that scaffolding an essay plan could be vital in the development of these skills. Subsequently, I created the planning resource to assist the class in logically planning their thoughts on an essay-style question to lead to an overall better standard of writing. Moreover, in Full study, 60% of the students in her sample group produced and followed an essay plan. Yet Full remarked that they perhaps need some guidance on how to plan more quickly and concisely. This acknowledgement is highly convincing, especially in the context of a Key Stage 4 class that require familiarity with exam-style activities. In my mixed attainment Year 10 class, this is fundamental when preparing them for their GCSE examinations. Finally, the assertions in teaching English, language and literacy inspired me to create the planning resource. It is quoted, "Professional writers have different approaches to planning, so it is logical to assume that children need a range of ways into writing." This convincing argument encouraged me to allow students the opportunity to create a visual timeline to track the development of the characters Macbeth and Lady Macbeth across the play before turning to my planning resource. In turn, this corroborated a visual creative task with the written essay plan to ensure students had access to different approaches to planning. Previously mentioned, my rationale behind developing the resource was to support students in their ability to plan essays. Specifically, I wanted to look at planning responses to Shakespearean texts, as this is often an overwhelming task for students, especially at the beginning of their Key Stage 4 studies. After discussing with my teacher mentor, we concluded that plot knowledge is a strength in this class. As a result, I opted to focus on developing their reading and writing skills through planning. This would also develop their interdependence, relational thinking, and procedural knowledge. In the June 2023 AQA Examiner's report, it was noted that there were instances where students drifted from the question which might have been avoided with careful planning. This encouraged me to develop the planning resource that logically tracked an argument throughout the essay. Moreover, the resource included some bullet points in the introduction segment where students are prompted to use the wording of the question. Not only did this encourage my class to stay focused on the question, it also allowed them to create a strong opening statement that set out the focus and direction of their response. Furthermore, The introduction box in my planning resource encouraged students to consider a thesis statement with relevant context and a focus on character. The rationale behind these bullet points is the AQA examiner report that stated there appears to be a greater number of students who are writing clearly structured responses which begin with a thesis, and this is becoming increasingly apparent at various levels of response. It was important in my resource to consider all levels of response due to the mixed attainment context of my class. In turn, the bullet points permitted students to think ambitiously at all levels of attainment, to draw on their prior knowledge and consider how to respond to the question in a thesis statement. Differently, I chose to leave the bullet points in the boxes for the main 2 paragraphs in the main body of the essay to remain blank. This is because, from my observations in both Key Stage 3 and Key Stage 4, I have noticed that planning resources with writing frames can be incredibly restrictive. In my Year 8 classes, a what, how, why writing frame is often utilised when encouraging students to plan and write assessment tasks. Although this is innovative in allowing Key Stage 3 students to familiarise themselves with essay-style writing, it is also extremely restrictive. Many students begin to sound monotonous in their style of writing and incredibly repetitive. This has also been picked up on from the AQA exam board for Key Stage 4, noting that there are responses where students are clearly following a set model for every paragraph. It rapidly becomes very limiting for some students who repeatedly follow the same approach to each paragraph, rather than exploring the text and developing their ideas. Instead, I wanted my students to have a degree of flexibility in their writing. As a result, I printed the resource on A3 paper so students had lots of space to brainstorm ideas without stricture. Subsequently, this could then encourage students to develop a personal response to the essay question. When using my resource in practice, I decided to take a social constructivist approach to teaching. This is based off the theories of Lev Vygotsky, who emphasized the importance of a blend of teacher-guided and pupil-centered learning. He states learning should be a collaborative process between student and teacher. Furthermore, it should involve group work elements, teacher modelling, questioning, individual and whole class work. Ultimately, the social constructivist believes that the learning takes place through language and the dialogue between 2 or more learners. I was able to implement this in my lesson through initially introducing the essay question alongside a timeline task. This involved students verbally discussing key moments in the play and tracking where Macbeth and Lady Macbeth's representation shifted throughout the play. Throughout this task, I was able to circulate the room to aid student discussion. After the timeline task, I decided to cold call on students to contribute the moments in the play they put on their timelines. This was effective following on from the peer work, as it allowed students to develop their independence before contributing to a whole class discussion. Then, I instructed the students to translate their peer work onto the planning sheet. Again, this was a collaborative process where I circulated the room and used questioning to develop a personal response from specific students. I was able to aid the individual needs of the students in the class confidently throughout the essay planning process, as I had initially provided students with the confidence they needed to begin the worksheet. Furthermore, the element of discussion seemed successful throughout the duration of the activity due to the nature of the class. My teacher mentor and I recognised that this particular class require elements of talk throughout their lessons to avoid low-level chatter and disruption. Furthermore, Barak Rosenshine's 2010 theorizes scaffolding as a teaching technique in his 10 principles of instruction. The metaphor of scaffolding implies that when the pupils are ready to work independently, the supports are withdrawn. This theory underpinned the rationale of my resource because it strategically allows students of all academic abilities to practice their writing skills with a level of support. Due to the cognitive nature of English, the resource adopts scaffolding techniques to help the students move through the stages of analysing a text. However, as previously mentioned, I was careful not to provide rigid sentence structures because that would imply that English has a singular formulaic writing structure. This could limit the effectiveness of my resource. Instead, peer discussion was permitted as I circulated the room to support students in their essay planning. Although this activity differs from the typical planning required from students in their GCSE timed examinations, the use of scaffolding in collaboration with a social constructivist approach permits all students in the mixed attainment class to feel a level of support before attempting one of their first essay-style questions. A strength of this approach is that it allows students to approach the task in numerous ways. Some students opted to discuss Macbeth's character in the first planning box, tracking his change from Act 2 to Act 5. In turn, they did the same with the character of Lady Macbeth in the second box. However, other students decided to initially talk about both Macbeth and Lady Macbeth in Act 2, then the two characters, in Act 5 for the second box. Ultimately, this highlights the subjectivity of English as a subject and reveals to the students how flexible the subject can be. I believe scaffolding is one of the most effective tools in teaching and learning in English. The Education Endowment Foundation defines scaffolding as a metaphor for temporary support that is removed when it is no longer required, providing enough support so that pupils can successfully complete tasks that they could not yet do independently. From my own observations with this Year 10 class, I have often identified that many individuals struggle knowing how to get started when they are set on a writing task. For example, one lower attaining student with a diagnosis of ADHD often needs encouragement from the teacher and typically has questions before he can begin. Similarly, students that are often on track to achieve their target grades typically put their hands up to query the structure of their writing and how to approach the task. As a result, in my lesson, I ensured I used a visual and a written scaffold by providing students with the worksheet that breaks up their critical thinking and organises their logical arguments. The intended outcome of my use of scaffolding was to encourage students to structure a response that is cohesive and confident. I anticipated that scaffolding would have a positive impact on the overall learning in the classroom for students of all ability. However, whilst I did use strong scaffolds in my deployment of the resource, I opted to steer clear from restrictive writing frames. A positive argument for utilising a writing frame would be that they are designed to offer students more control over language and to offer support to allow them to express themselves more clearly in the written form. This could have supported the students of all levels effectively in my mixed attainment class. However, often, writing frames are not used to support and encourage students in their independent writing, but are used as a rigid structure that feels compulsory to follow. Simon Gibbons convincingly argues that the problem comes when the structured approach to writing is not used as a foundation on which students build to become competent, creative, independent writers. Instead, the mastery of the structures become the end, not the means to an end. This is something I often observe in Key Stage 3 lessons, where most of the students' responses begin to sound the same. Furthermore, writing frames often produce a response where students look at quotations in isolation without linking their ideas or engaging with the big ideas or themes in the play. Often, the next paragraph is entirely unrelated. Therefore, I opted for a big planning space that invited and encouraged flexibility and subsequently a developed personal response to the question. Overall, the resource appeared to be impactful for the class. The pupils appeared to enjoy the collaborative element of this task. They enjoyed discussing different moments in the play and what quotations they were selecting to track the change in the two characters. They also seemed enthusiastic as I circulated the room when telling me about the moments they had selected. It is important to me that students enjoyed the discussion element permitted throughout the task. The report of the Commission on the Future of Oracy Education in England 2024 stresses the urgency for the need for students to talk in lessons. The Oracy Education Commission believes that oracy plays a significant part in helping our young people to understand and tell the great stories of our cultures, to find their own voice, to get a deeper joy from learning. Furthermore, there is very strong evidence that oracy education helps children in learning to, through, and about talk, listening, and communication. As previously mentioned, my Year 10 class were in primary school when the schools closed in March 2020 for the COVID-19 lockdown. Subsequently, it is incredibly important that an educational experience with lots of talk will enable these students to reach their potential and build their confidence. However, the students were a little apprehensive about building up to a writing task. Nonetheless, once they began to plan, they seemed to enjoy scaffolding a plan rather than being thrown immediately into the writing task. Before we began to plan on the resource, I emphasised that the students' work will not be assessed, but we were simply practicing exam skills prior to their end of subject assessment. The students appeared confident in their approach to the task due to the knowledge developed in the first two lessons in the sequence. As I circulated the room, I heard lots of students engaged and enthusiastic when tracking the change in the characters from the beginning of the play to Act 5. Most discussion was centered around Act 2 in contrast to Act 5. When students were off topic or slow to start, they implied that they did not know where to begin. Fortunately, I had pre-prepared some quotations from Act 2 on a worksheet for both characters and was able to direct the students to this resource to support them. Furthermore, some students were asking if they could use other parts of the text as well. This was great to hear as it implied that they were confident in their approach to the task and showed me that they were keen to deploy their subject knowledge onto the resource. The majority of the class engaged well with the task, and no student needed any additional work, as everyone could engage deeply with the resource at all different attainment levels. It was clear that all students were participating in the lesson. This was demonstrated when I got the class to hold up their books to show me their timeline. This then reassured me that I could trust that the class were prepared for the planning sheet. After talking with my teacher mentor, we reflected on how engaged the students were throughout the sequence of lessons. Specifically, the students engaged with the resource to a high degree. Students moved beyond using only the knowledge taught to them in the first 2 lessons of the sequence and instead opted to consider other moments in the play. Furthermore, we spoke about how the structure of the lesson plan allowed for formative assessment in the next lesson. Since the lesson fell on a day where the class had double English, the resource worked conveniently to set the students up strongly for their writing task. I've often noticed that the scheduling of lessons can be a barrier to learning at times. Students often have hours, if not days, between their English lessons. As a result, I decided to use the opportunity of the double lesson, spaced 3 hours apart, to formatively assess the class. Moreover, my teacher mentor complimented how I circulated the classroom well to support the students whilst they engaged with the resource. There were not many questions from the students who were prepared with their timeline, Act 2 quotations, and their existing knowledge from their studies of Macbeth and the sequence of lessons. However, the students still sought reassurance from myself. To develop the students' learning further, I would elevate the effectiveness of the resource by drawing more attention to the conclusion box. This was something that very few students engaged with. This would permit their responses to be entirely cohesive and support the overall structure of the essay. This supports the AQA examiner reports that highlighted the effectiveness of a developed argument with a holistic approach to a character or text. Moreover, this would help students progress towards a level 6 response, which is outlined in the AQA mark scheme as a well-structured argument. Overall, the pupils' learning was effectively developed through the use of my resource. Despite the class-moving classroom for the 4th lesson in the sequence, which could usually be disruptive to write their formative piece, the entire class worked well throughout the duration of the lesson. After reading the class responses, I conclude that all students have understood how Macbeth and Lady Macbeth change throughout the play. Furthermore, it is clear that most students are developing cohesive personal responses to an essay-style question. Through the lesson taught, it is clear that students benefit from and enjoy peer work. This highlights the importance of oracy within English lessons, revealing the need for collaboration from both teacher and students. Peer work proved incredibly effective throughout the deployment of my resource. Finally, the class approached the planning and writing components of this task with confidence, following the use of scaffolding implemented throughout my sequence of lessons. Finally, I believe that the students' learning was developed in accordance with the Key Stage 4 national curriculum. In terms of their reading, students were permitted the opportunity to explore aspects of plot, characterization, events and settings, the relationships between them and their effects, make critical comparisons and interpret major themes in the play. Moreover, in relation to their writing skills, students were encouraged to select and organize ideas, facts and key points, and cite in evidence, details and quotation effectively and pertinently for support and emphasis.